And God, we ask now that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts would be pleasing to you and helpful to us as we pursue a life of faith. We ask it because of Jesus. Amen. So the image that came to me as I considered this passage over the last few weeks is the image of home. We have lived in our house for 10 years now, here on the northwest side of Grand Rapids. But prior to that, I had lived at one count in 17 houses in 32 years, in 2 different states and 2 different countries. I have had a nomadic existence. In particular, as what is called a third culture kid, having spent significant and formative years in my teenage years living in a different culture, but then returning to live in my home culture, it means that I don't fit in. I'm neither a product of my own native culture, nor can I rightly claim to be part of the culture in which I spent those years. I have a third culture that's really all my own. My brother and I are the total population of that culture when it comes right down to it. And so I have said for most of my life that as a result, I am at home everywhere and nowhere. I am at home everywhere and nowhere. And so as much as it is gratifying to me to have spent 10 years in a single house and to hopefully spend many more years in that house, I have no desire to move ever again. But I know better than to say that in the presence of the Almighty. It still, in many ways, will never be home. This is simply my reality. And there's a phrase that I have thought about that has 2 expressions to it as I've thought about this, which is that you can always or you can never go home. I live with that reality. I'm constantly saying I am at home everywhere, but also in a way at home nowhere. Both mine and my wife's parents no longer live in the city in which we were born and raised. We have no childhood home even to go back to for holidays. When we go to visit family for holidays, it's to a place we have no memory of. And the title of the sermon for this morning, Homeward Bound, is based on the movie of the same name, about these 3 domestic pets who get separated from their family and they make this treacherous journey across the Sierra Nevada mountains in California to get back home. And in an early scene of the movie, the character Shadow, who is in the role of John the Revelator, he is the one with the vision to take these pets back to their home, has led them up to the ridge, and he's told them, when we get to the top of the ridge, we'll be able to see the house. And they reach the top of the ridge, and Chance, voiced by Michael J. Fox, is the young pup in the expedition. And he gets to the top and says, "Wow, this is incredible. I can see everything from here. Except the house, Shadow. I don't see the house. Where's the house?" Shadow has this vision. Chance is wondering when he's going to see it. And I think John the Revelator gives us a vision of our spiritual house. He's assuring us that we can see it. And yet I think oftentimes I find myself in the role of Chance saying, "I don't know, Shadow, I don't see the house. Where's the house? How far? How many things are we going to have to go through before we get home?" And that's why I think it's important as we read this passage. The tradition in which I was raised made a lot of trying to get very literal with the details here, and things like a river flowing down the main street of a city with trees growing on either side. You think about it too hard and your head hurts and it doesn't make sense. We don't want to get caught up in the literal descriptions here. I don't think this is a literal city that will descend from the heavens. I think we are being given a description of the kind of place that we, as the people of God, call home. And this is because place gives us our identity. When you are from somewhere, you take on the qualities of that place. It means something to be from West Michigan. And having lived here for a decade, I'm still figuring out exactly what that means. And I have taken on some of those attributes, no doubt, but I will never be from here. Place informs who we are, and so John is giving us a vision of the place we are from, the place that is our home. It is a spiritual place, and we take on the attributes of that place. And it's not hard to see that this house, this home that John is describing the vision of, is reminding us of our first home. This last chapter of our scriptures is meant to mirror the first chapter of our scriptures and the description of the home that the Creator built for our first parents. Think about the things that are emphasized in this passage: light, life, and love. And that was what our first home was marked by. There was light, and there was abundant life, and all of these were the gifts of a Creator that loved us, that wanted to bless us. The first words of the Creator to our first parents are words of blessing: to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill the earth, to care for it, and to enjoy it. And this home that we are being presented with the vision of by John emphasizes those same things. Light is repeatedly called forth as a defining characteristic. And again, if you think about the physics of 24/7 light, again, your head will hurt, but that's not the point. There is life, there is abundant food and material for healing the nations, and love. All the nations will call this place home. The diversity of cultures will come together, creating, I think, a third culture, one marked by peace. So we live between that first home and this home that John is describing. Nothing about any of our homes, unless someone's keeping a very good secret, live up to our first home or our second home. And so we are a faith of exiles. We live between those houses. And from start to finish, our scriptures are full of the stories and the prayers and the hopes and the visions and the dreams of a people who are looking for a home. The author of Hebrews tells us that from the beginning it has been this way, and that we too are pilgrims, sojourners, wanderers on the earth, confident that this home exists and that we are on our way to it. That is why, as an aside, there is a central and explicit expectation in our sacred texts that we will be a people who welcome and do not do violence in word or deed to refugees, to anyone who is without a permanent home. It is not just a policy question, it is a deep moral one for us as people who identify as exiles, who have to say that we are at home everywhere and nowhere because we are between our homes. And if we think about the world that we inhabit, this home that we live in here and now, we catch glimpses of light and life and love from time to time. Hopefully, here in this space as often as we gather here. That is what we are meant to find here. It is to be reminded that light and life and love are real and exist and are available. And hopefully not just here. Hopefully in many other instances we catch these glimpses. But if we are honest, we seem surrounded by darkness and death and hate. And that is why we are a people of faith. It is an act of courage to believe, in spite of so much evidence to the contrary, that light, life, and love are realer and truer than the things that we more often encounter. That reality has caused one branch of our faith to suggest that we are so deeply flawed and broken that at our core, we are wretchedly evil and sinful. That is what is truest about us. Because look at what we have wrought. Look at what we have done. And there's a suggestion that this creates a problem because a holy and righteous God cannot dwell with such wretched, evil creatures. And so much theology has been spent trying to address this separation between a holy God and a sinful humanity. And I thought about this recently. This was the tradition in which I was raised. I've done a lot of reflecting on it. And it seems to overlook something really obvious throughout the pages of our texts. Most importantly, in the reality of Jesus. God is constantly getting close to us. God is constantly moving in our direction. And the phrase that the other John, who writes the gospel, uses to describe this activity of God in Jesus is that Jesus is God tabernacling with us. God literally dwelling among us in our tents of exile, joining us in our journey between our permanent homes. But between the temple garden that we read about in the first chapter and the city with no temple in the end, because God dwells there. And it's not any different than right now. God has always dwelled with humanity. God has never let the ways in which we have broken the world to prevent God from being present with us and to bless us. And this is so important for us to understand. Our first home was meant to be open and full and blessed. But our first parents took a step, as we read that text, that caused it to be closed and cursed. And so we need to hear the words of John, who sees a new home that will never be shut or empty. All the nations will come in, and there will never be a curse again. And importantly, just as an aside, nowhere in the text of Genesis is humanity cursed. Just the ground. Just the ground. We are still blessed, in spite of our refusal to believe in that blessing. So here's the reason that I don't believe in hell for all eternity for anybody. I think there are a few reasons, but the biggest one is I don't think God needs to do that because we do that well enough ourselves. All you have to do is look at Ukraine or Gaza or South Sudan or any of the other hundreds of places, large and small, around our world where we make life unbearably cruel and impose suffering on countless millions of people and experience that suffering in many ways ourselves. There's no need for an eternal hell when we're living in one right now. The other thing is, I think that there is this idea that somehow heaven is the opposite of everything that we would naturally want. Like it's this place that's good, but it's good because we don't get to do any of the stuff that we enjoy. And hell's where all the people are having fun but miserable at the same time, and we just can't square that math. And I just think that that's a gross misreading of our scriptures. The heaven that God intends for us is good because it's good. It's its own best advertisement. And so the phrase, its gates will never be shut, explains why no one who practices evil will go in. I imagine this scenario, and C.S. Lewis writes about it as well. You've got heaven over here with all the light and life and love, and you've got people who still haven't been persuaded that that's better, but I think eventually everybody comes around. Eventually everybody looks around at things like Gaza that will be perpetuated in this vision outside the city of God, and they say, you know, it's not working out so well. That seems to be better. And the promise is that they will never face a moment where it will be too late, where they will approach the gates and find that it has been shut in their face. That invitation stands for all eternity. And so everyone eventually will recognize the goodness of the ways of light and life and love and enter the city, leaving behind all of the unclean, detestable, and false things that we see enacted around us on a daily basis. But we're in between. And so impermanence, temporary, is our watchword. That is our lot. That is our situation. And why even the sweetest home that we create or live in here is always bittersweet, because we know it doesn't last. Whether through death or division, and many of us have experienced alienation and estrangement from those that we used to home with. We know it doesn't last. It's not permanent. Too many of us know those realities entirely too well. So there are just two things that I want you to know before you leave here today. You can always go home. The home that God creates for us, that we seek to embody here. Why we begin every service by saying you are welcome here is because we are to be the home that God creates, in which God dwells. So you can always go home. Your home is with God. It is here. The second thing is that we can always make home for everyone around us. In this moment in our culture and society, there is an epidemic of loneliness. There are no shortage of people to make home with. And so we must be the kinds of people who are always going home and who are always making home for others. And when we do that, we are welcoming the city of God in our midst. Amen?